name is Rome,
And I'm Angela.
and today we want to take you on a journey across two musical worlds, two instruments, two traditions, and two philosophies that at first glance seem simply to be different kinds of music making. But when you look closer, they reveal two fundamentally different ideas about what music is, what music does to a person who plays it or listens to it. On the one side, we have the Guqin, a 7-string Chinese zither with a history stretching back more than 3,000 years. It was the instrument of the scholars, sages, and recluses. It was played alone in quiet rooms or mountaintops. On the other side, we have the piano, developed in the 18th century Europe, refined into a concert instrument of tremendous power and expressive range, capable of filling grand halls and moving audiences of thousands. Being an instrument with thousands of years of history, Guqin sheds light on the unique musical tradition and philosophy of China. A musical tradition deeply intertwined with the core philosophies of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, and which reflects a lot of the aesthetic preferences and ontological views of these systems.
And to explore the tradition of Guqin, a useful point of comparison is the piano, and this instrument is familiar to all of us. The modern piano was developed much later than the Guqin, and it has become nearly synonymous with the Western musical tradition. So the two instruments, Guqin and piano, and their musical traditions ask different things of their players, and they embody different assumptions about the relationship between music and human emotion. In order to understand the tradition of Guqin, we want to address the following elements of Guqin and use the piano as a point of comparison. First, the minimalistic notation of Guqin as compared to classical piano notation, how the two traditions notate music differently, and what that tells us about interpretation. Second of all, how the Guqin tradition positions music in relation to knowledge, virtue, and the inner life.
So, first of all, let's talk about notation. The Guqin uses a special notation system that is completely independent of the one that most people may be familiar in the West. It's called Jianzipu, and it literally translates to abbreviated character notation. Why is that? It was developed during the Tang Dynasty, first of all, and standardized during the Ming. And the reason it's called abbreviated character notation is because it has elements from Chinese characters written onto it to represent different notes, finger placements, etc. But while it uses characters to encode how to play, which string, which finger, hand position, which technique, it does not specify pitches on a staff like we're used to. And what's really important about Jianzipu is that it does not specify rhythm. There's no standard rhythmic notation in the Guqin score at all. No time signature, no note values, no metronome markings. You might be wondering, what does this mean about playing? So the notation tells you where to put your fingers and how to move your hand, but not how long to linger. And this empty space that's left within this notation is up to you to fill with your interpretation, which is a crucial part of mastering this instrument and represents the idea of space as a fundamental notion in Chinese philosophy in general. This is somewhat similar to the white spaces often left in paintings. This white space is supposed to be filled in with your mind and its input, which is similar in very many aspects to Guqin.
And the tradition of Guqin holds that rhythm, the breath, and the pulse of a piece, and it must emerge from the player's interior state. And the interior state of that player depends on the time. And interior states of one player across time are different from the interior states of other players across time. And from the scholar reading, Picturing Guqin Music, we learned that the notation was deliberately open-ended so that each performance would reflect the player's cultivation, their mood, and their spiritual disposition at that particular moment. A piece played in one mental state sounds very meaningfully different from the same piece played in another or by another. For example, the piece Lady Xiang's Lament sounds like this when Rome plays it. As you can see, my interpretation is very different from Rome's interpretation. His contains very heavy vibrato, and our sliding tones are also very different. Our tempos are not the same, and neither are our rhythms.
In Western classical music, particularly the piano tradition, we tend to think of a musical score as a kind of precise instructional set. The composer writes down the notes to play, how long to hold them, how loud or soft to play them, not how fast or slow. It is somewhat like assembling furniture from IKEA. You're given precise instructions, and if you want the correct product that functions, you follow those instructions to a T. A pianist studies a score and works to execute it faithfully according to the composer's intentions.
So, for example, as you can see here, Bach wrote this fugue in C minor, and it is played similarly across players to preserve the composition's essence. For example, the tempos will be very similar, the dynamics will also be very similar, and of course, the rhythms are very precise, no matter the tempo that the performer chooses to take, although that will also be very similar. As you can see, the rhythms, pitch, tempos, and dynamics are similar across both players, but my interpretation is more legato or connected, while the other player plays more detached, which is the greatest difference in our interpretations. This contrasts with the Guqin piece that Rome and I played earlier. Our stylistic choices varied very drastically because of the notation that allows us to freely interpret the piece based on our current internal state.
Now, we have to talk about the ambiance, or the performance in both of these instruments. The meditative versus the performative aspects, or entertainment aspects. The performance culture of Guqin has been very uniquely and deeply intertwined with the solemn meditation, and music as a way to both gaze into your inner self and express virtues. As a meditative practice, the music produced by the qin was thought to represent the orderly working of the world itself. How grandiose a concept. According to Ulrich Mitteldorf, for Confucian thinkers, true music and its performance are symbols of social and political theory in action, and represents the workings of the entire cosmos. The supreme role that music plays in channeling the order of the cosmos into virtues held by men is the reason why playing the Guqin is seen as such a spiritual pursuit. Music is thought to have shaped the minds of the population, both into joy and sacred ritual, and help with understanding public and private ceremonies. Guqin is meditative, while the piano in the European classical tradition is entertainment. They both share the purpose of self-expression, don't get me wrong. Piano is supposed to demonstrate your inner world outward, but at the same time, you can play the Guqin very differently across time and across different individuals. But with classical piano, the same piece might be interpreted differently each time, but the core essence of the piece is preserved.
And this ties into the concept of knowing by music, where one understands not only the music being played and the skill of the musician, but also grander ideas such as virtue and the intentions or emotions of another in their current interior state. The Guqin tradition demonstrates this idea due to its contemplative, reflective nature, which requires complex understanding and processing rather than simply hearing. The record of music, or 乐记, is a classic text found within the Book of Rites that details the process of knowing by music. And it divides the process of knowing by music into 3 distinct stages. The first stage is perception of sound alone, or 声. The second stage is recognition of music, or 音. It is at this stage that one hears more complex, meaningful elements of Guqin music, such as dynamics, rhythms, and technique. And the third and final stage is understanding music with a capital M. And this is also called 乐. This is the final stage, where one deciphers the messages hidden under the 声, or first stage, sound, and 音, or second stage, music, with a small m, of intent and virtue. As an example, I would like to talk about the Chinese play called Romance of the Western Chamber, written by Wang Shifu. And this play embodies the process of knowing by music perfectly, with the encounter between the 2 protagonists, Cui Yingying and Zhang Sheng. On their first encounter, Zhang Sheng is playing the Guqin. When Yingying hears the tone of the qin, she is mesmerized by the sounds, and drawing metaphors to gold and jade and wind chimes. This represents the first stage of understanding by music, or 声. As Yingying continues to listen, she recognizes Zhang Sheng's skill, making mental notes of his technique and personal interpretation. This represents the second stage, yin. Yingying then deciphers the hidden messages beneath Zhang Sheng's music. She recognizes that Zhang Sheng's contemplative, reflective tones of the Guqin actually represent his longing and desire for a mate. This represents the third stage, 乐, with a capital M for music. Yingying's journey to knowing by music as defined by the classic record of music. This allows her to pursue a love story with Zhang Sheng. Thus, the Chinese tradition of Guqin represents understanding virtue and messages through subtle, reflective, and quiet music. And this idea contrasts very deeply with the European tradition of classical piano, which attempts to embody imagery and emotion through conspicuous musical depictions. For instance, the Romantic composer Frédéric Chopin, he wrote the Revolutionary Etude as an emotional response toward the bombing of Warsaw, Poland, which is his homeland. As you will see, this etude is relentless, powerful, and very dramatic. Chopin's message is obvious. It demonstrates his grief toward the political events of his home as he could only watch from afar in the safety of Paris, France, as he is composing this music. This idea, demonstrated by Frédéric Chopin's etude, contrasts with the process of understanding Guqin music, which is very subtle and meditative, and it requires the listener to think deeply and read in between the lines to find hidden messages and virtue.
Thank you for this enthralling tale, Angela. As we can see, this journey that we have taken throughout the two worlds of the East and West demonstrate not only differences in instrument, one may think shallow differences in how the instrument looks and how the instrument sounds. But these differences entail and arise from much larger differences in the philosophy of music. And music, as Schopenhauer puts it, is something that unites all men, all human beings, in a primordial level that goes beneath our expression of ourselves as individuals. It unites us into this amorphous, de-individualized, universal self. And these two different views of music are therefore significant because they shed light into the societies that produce them and us as human beings who listen, consume, and produce this music. Guqin is the instrument of mountain sages, of masters of Taoism, of Confucian scholars. Creates a whole different way of looking at the music as a sacred, virtuous, and profoundly meditative experience, as opposed to piano's grandiose, enthralling, and thunderous performance heard across the halls of Europe during the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. And comparing these traditions reveals differences that are still important in our day and age and help us understand music from a completely new angle. Thank you so much. This has been Rome. Angela, like and subscribe.